Zoominar program hosted by
Recording in progress.
This is a monthly program. This is the third semester in which we're. The theme of meetings is language, society, and education. And we have a very international program, but also an emphasis on Indonesia. Each month, at the beginning of each meeting, I try to give you an interesting piece of information about Jakarta for anyone who's not familiar with Jakarta. And something I learned a couple of days ago from recent research carried out by Institute Technology Bandung. They calculated that the number of journeys by motor vehicles in Jakarta is 80 million journeys per day, which is a spectacular number. So after that brief introduction, I'd like to invite Ibu Arita to say something in welcome to the participants.
Thank you, Hayuel. Good afternoon from Jakarta, distinguished keynote speakers, resource persons, Vice Rector of Academic Affairs of Universitas Negeri Jakarta, Board of Directors of Postgraduate of Universitas Negeri Jakarta, and participants from many parts of the world. My name is Arita Marini as Coordinator of Collaboration and Development Center. I'm representing the Director to give welcoming remarks in today's session. He's currently on another agenda. This is a new chapter of our international Zoominar. We expect more audiences, especially doctoral degree students, to attend this series of insightful sessions. We hope that it will encourage students to internalize topics discussed by our distinguished speakers and potentially raise the topics for dissertations. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our monthly international Zoominar program in 2022 related to language, society, education. What an honor to have you join us in this month's international Zoominar program hosted by Postgraduate of UNJ. The scope of this monthly international program may cover an international level of topics, but we often link it with Indonesian context. In the hope of obtaining insight from our international colleagues, as well as providing a discussion platform from our students here in Indonesia and those who are passionate in these topics. Our topic this August is focusing on knowledge production in Indonesia universities, the role of literacies in research writing, and our respected keynote speakers, Dr. Ibrahim Bhatt, Queen's University, Belfast, Northern Ireland, and Dr. Udi Samanhudi from Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa, Indonesia, have joined us now in the session. Hello, Dr. Bhatt and Dr. Samanhudi. Good afternoon from Jakarta. They will discuss about the way international shifts in research writing are creating a new set of expectations upon academics in Indonesia. We also thank Hayuel Coleman, who has coordinated this Zoominar and in charge of being our moderator for this session. Once again, thank you very much for allocating your time to speak in our session today, Dr. Bhatt and Dr. Samanhudi. Without further ado, I wish you a fruitful discussion and thank you for your attendance and participation in this month's international Zoominar program. We have here join us our Honorable Vice Rector, Professor Suyono. He will be giving his remarks. Professor Suyono, the screen is yours. Professor Suyono.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Arita. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable Director of Postgraduate Program UNJ, Professor Dr. Dedi Purwana, Deputy of Academic Affairs, Professor Dr. Wardani Rahayu, Deputy of Financial Affairs, Professor Dr. M. Jafar, And then Coordinator of Development and Collaboration Center, Professor Dr. Arita Marini. Distinguished speakers, Dr. Ibrar Bat from Queen's University, Belfast, Northern Ireland, and Dr. Udi Samanhudi from Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa, the moderator, Professor Harold Coleman, and all participants. Thank you so much for joining us today. On behalf of the Rector, I'm honored to welcome you to the monthly International Zoominar Program 2020, organized by the Postgraduate Program Universitas Negeri Jakarta. Ladies and gentlemen, as mandated by Tridharma Perguruan Tinggi, research is one of our responsibilities. We need to constantly remind ourselves that conducting research is not only for completing the Tridharma, but most importantly, how our research can contribute to society. Universitas Negeri Jakarta has a vision to become a reputable university in Asia. It is our dream to contribute more in the regional as well as international communities. Therefore, improving research performance is our main priority. I'm happy that in recent years, we have seen an increase in the lecture research productivity. The number of UNJ's publication has gone up. But let's not just stop there. We also need to pay attention to the quality of the research and the publication. High quality research not only provides solutions to our problems, but also leads to new discoveries, development of breakthrough technologies, and expand our knowledge. In today's Zoominar, we can learn and gain insight about knowledge production, especially in the role of literacies in research writing. I hope you can acquire new knowledge and develop skills in conducting research. Lastly, I hope you find this online Zoominar intellectually stimulating and rewarding. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Professor Suyono and Professor Arita. Professor Arita has already introduced our two speakers, so I don't need to introduce them again. Just to add that Ibrar Bat has visited Indonesia a number of times, so he knows the situation here. And his interests include writing and literacy as a social practice. And at the moment, he's a Leave of Hume Research Fellow, and he's doing research, if I'm not mistaken, in China, looking at Chinese and Muslim relationships. Sounds very good. And Bapak Samanhudi is a lecturer in English in his university, and his interests are in linguistics education. So can I ask participants to mute your microphones and to switch off your cameras so that we don't take up too much bandwidth? And let's listen to what Ibrar and Samanhudi have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for inviting us. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Vice Rector Professor Suyono and the Professor Faisal Madni, Dr. Hal Coleman, and Ibu Arita and the other members of the committee who have organized this and invited us. I will just share the window where I have the slideshow open. If you just bear with me for one moment while I attempt to do that. Let's see. Okay, can you see my
Yes, Ibra, very clear.
Very good, thank you. If you see my head going from side to side, it's because I have two screens. You are on one screen. Let me just move you to this screen, and that way I address you directly. Okay, so my name is Ibrar Bat, and I'm a senior lecturer at Queen's University in Belfast. And as Hal said, my research focus is usually related to literacy and as a social practice, although much of the context of that research has been in higher education. So hence my interest in higher educational research. a lot of that recently has actually been in relation to writing. And Dr. Udi Samanhudi is a senior lecturer at Untirta,
In
you may
Banten.
know. Banten, yeah.
Yes.
You want to mention something about your background, Udi?
Yes, I'm currently an English lecturer at the Department of English, Faculty of Education at Universitas Sultan Ageng Tirtayasa. My research interest is almost similar as Ibrar's. I'm really concerned on academic literacies, academic writing, and also academic writing and discourse analysis.
Yeah. So while HE has always been a context of my research, recently I won an award from the Liverhume Foundation to conduct a literacy studies project with Chinese Muslim communities. So that put me out of higher education and into into sort of community work, but still I'm still committed to applied linguistics as a field, and I utilize and I'm trained in the research methods of applied linguistics. So that's how I see myself in terms of discipline. Udi?
Right, yeah. I think it's always a good idea to start any presentations with the reflections in order to see ourselves very clearly. And now the reflections will be on our academic writing practice. So we would like to invite you to get back to your own practice of doing academic writing so far. So get back to your experience when you first wrote your draft of academic writing. What has changed over time, and what you enjoy and dislike most about academic writing. Okay, you can be very honest to yourself. If you want to respond, you can write down in the chat box, or you can raise your virtual hands and then say something in response to all this. But if you just want to, reflect for yourself, that will be no problem. But I think it's, yes, trying to be honest to yourself by answering all these 7 questions or points. I think that will be a very good start for this presentation.
Thank you, Udi. And these are some of the questions that we ask the participants in the research that we are now presenting on with you, to you. So this is just because our research is about academics, and you, or most of you probably will be academics or training to be academics, then it's sometimes a useful thing to do. We found that it's quite useful when we present on our research. So keep a little screenshot of those questions if you want to.
Yeah, and I think point number 7 is the most interesting, related to how we view being an international scholar. We will elaborate further. Yeah, point number 7. I think that will be the most interesting one for everyone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe some of the others, like how are you learning to write as an academic?
Yes, true.
Each of them could be, really. So this research builds on a number of things that we've done in the past. If you take that QR code and you scan it, that's the paper that Udi and I have published about this research, and it connects well to what we're talking about today. So you could, if you like multitasking, you can read that while we're speaking. So that's that. The research that I was involved in at Lancaster University, about which we published this book called Academics Writing, the Dynamics of Knowledge Creation. The research also builds on that research, which was about how academics working in English universities, how they engage in forms of writing, multiple forms of writing, not just research writing, but also writing for teaching, admin writing, and things like that. Although in this particular research that we're talking to you about, we focus on research writing, the research writing of Indonesian academics. I've made multiple trips to Indonesia, as Howell has told you, and the beginning of this research came out of a trip to Untirta in 2017, and some of the data collection was undertaken during my trips to Indonesia, and some of it was undertaken by Udi in Indonesia, and also through remote methods when the pandemic hit us. And the research also builds on Udi's doctoral thesis on academic discourse. Well, there are methodological and theoretical connections to our prior work, and you can access that work if you want to take things, you want to find out about that trajectory. The research is focused on the Indonesian context, which Udi will now talk about.
Yeah. Right. So with the conduct of this study has been
Is Udi still there? Well, what Udi was saying is that the research is based on. I think I'll wait for him to come back, but I'll keep going. So it's based on the Indonesian context, the higher education context, which I'm sure most of you know about. How Indonesian academics have to manage their research writing, and how their academic professionalism is a key indicator of their writing, and their writing is a key indicator of their academic professionalism. How Scopus journals are used as a proxy for quality, and how there are subsequently massive changes to academic professional work and identity, and also a large number of scholarship programs funded by the Indonesian government to send Indonesian academics to research-intensive universities globally in order to bring them back to Indonesia to then be research active within Indonesia. And there are a number of transformations taking place in Indonesian higher education in relation to managerialism, a term that we use in the West. I don't know if you use it in Indonesia, but we use it to describe the way that people in workplaces are judged by performance indicators which come from the private sector rather than the public sector. And so often people are judged by the amount of papers they have written, or the impact factor, or the indexing of the journal in which they have written. And this echoes a trend across parts of Asia, not just Indonesia, China, to some extent Malaysia, and other forms of sectors of higher education globally. And this affects, of course, the writing practices of Indonesian academics. It affects the career paths that they take, and it affects multiple things in relation to how they see themselves, how Indonesian academics see themselves. Are they writing for a local audience, a regional audience, or a global audience? And language and other factors are a part to play in that. Is Udi coming back? Has he come back in?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry with the connection. Yeah.
You want to just finish what you were saying?
Yeah, Ibra, a lot of difficulties encountered by many academics. I think including me myself. My last doctoral thesis was much really encouraged by the experience that I myself experienced or felt. So these difficulties in, for example, writing research articles based on certain norms and conventions, and then lack of abilities in writing research article in English have been very major factors for why academic writing and then publishing the research paper into a high-ranking international journal is become something very difficult for many of us. Some are very successful. They can respond to the government policy that really encourage every academics to publish in high journal ranking, but many fail. So I think this research has helped many of us, including me myself, after reading the finding, for example. It's really reflect on what we really feel and what really actually want as academics in Indonesia. So examining, better understanding the practice of academic writing, the shift of this academic writing practice is really important, I trust.
Thank you, Udi. So like any research, we have to be grounded in some kind of theory which allows us to understand the problem and allows us to develop analytic insights from that problem. So literacy, it has a significant but complex relationship with social life. So we use literacy as a social practice as our theoretical basis to understand the transformations and tensions upon Indonesian academics as they write. In public debate, though, literacy is often talked about as a skill or a set of skills. This is quite common across languages as well. A skill that is divorced from context and easily transferred. So literacy is something that you have or you don't have. That's the common use of the term literacy. But if we are to understand the culture of research writing in the lives of Indonesian academics and what they need to be able to thrive in their transforming workplaces, we need to think about academic writing beyond a skills-based notion. We need to understand the social dimensions of their writing practices. We need to understand how those practices incorporate and give rise to value systems, identity work, how they are connected to maintaining and establishing relationships with people locally, regionally, and globally. And so this project is framed within this social practice perspective to literacy, where literacy, according to Brian Street, is understood as being, quote, rooted in conceptions of knowledge, identity, and being. Unlike other academics and practitioners who locate themselves in this tradition, we talk about literacy in the plural. We use the term literacies to signal a critique of the ahistorical, asocial, and uncontextual understanding of literacy, what Brian Street called the autonomous view of literacy. So literacies are always social practices because they are bound up with social processes which locate the individual in a social situation, and so understanding that situation is necessary, in particular the social ecology of Indonesian academics. So how academics have different social identities in relation to their writing, how they engage in many different kinds of writing related to their research writing, so even social media, different genres, and even emails, and how people learn to communicate and collaborate. These are all part of the province of interest for the literacy researcher. So methodologically, as you can imagine, we take an ethnographic commitment as our starting point. Literacy studies, therefore, goes hand in hand with linguistic ethnography. This means that in researching the literacy practices of academic professional work, we have to focus on how these practices are maintained and developed through interactions with people, how they emerge in systems of people and objects, even tools, how they are part of specific histories. That's why we asked in the questions at the start, how did you learn to write as an academic? What was your first piece of academic writing? So we're trying to locate practice as part of history. We're trying to locate it as part of cultural life within the institution, cultural ecology. And we're also trying to locate it within power and social structure, because that also has a big impact on literacy practices as we theoretically understand them. There are, of course, in the UK and in other countries now, what we call evaluation regimes. And the field of academic literacies is very closely tied to what we are doing, work by Teresa Lillis, etc. For example, in my previous research reported as Tusting et al., we found that writing is hugely techno-bureaucratic, with academics having to make many boundary-setting decisions between work and home, research and non-research, and even social media to support their research writing. Importantly for our research, that particular project also found that learning to write as an academic was very much dependent on support within your own network, informal support rather than formal training. So those are things that are quite interesting in previous studies that we have drawn on. And so this is our project. Do you want to start introducing it?
Yeah. So this project involved 22 early career academics from different disciplines. So we include academics from STEM backgrounds, and then arts, humanities, and business doctorates. So we do interview. We will talk a little bit more in the next slides about the interview. But the focus of this project is, as I said before, and also Ibrar, is to better understand the practice of academic writing that is a SIF, there is a new orientations of their academic writing practice, with the demand by the Indonesian government, for example, to publish in high international journals. We really want to know better what actually in their thought regarding this academic writing practice and then publishing in international journals. So then we start with much broader questions. How is knowledge produced and disseminated through the writing practices of Indonesian academics? And then how are digital technologies shaping these writing practices? And how is doctoral training shaping and supporting writing work? And how are international scholarly identities produced and shaped by these writing practices? In this presentation, Ibrar and I will only focus on our results of interview phase 1 and 2. So not all of these research questions, results, or findings will be reported or shared in this presentation. Ibrar.
Yeah, and so data collection was conducted over a 2-year period via face-to-face methods within Indonesia and in the UK, because doctoral students who are academics in Indonesia are also part of the sample through online interviews when the COVID pandemic came upon us. Through our various networks, we developed a sample. We recruited a sample of 22, and the reason why we kind of stopped recruiting and reached when we felt we reached saturation, when we felt that there were commonalities across the different contexts, and of course we had a limited budget for the research, and of course we went into quite a bit of depth in the multiple interviews and in the videography, which is the third phase, with 10 of the participants. So with that in mind, we felt that 22 was a reasonable number. And of course, other people can take this research further if they want to by focusing on individual aspects like discipline, gender, location in Indonesia, etc. But so the 22 participants were subject to a phased methodology. This initially involved repeat interviews and collections of samples of writing being worked on at the time. We discussed these samples came out in research encounters, and we discussed them in subsequent interviews and in follow-up correspondence. In the interviews, we discussed academic writing histories and academic writing futures, so where their past fits into where they are and where they would like to go. Professional writing practices in the institution, and collaboration and academic identity. For 10 of these participants, we conducted a deeper level of data collection and a third phase of videographic recording. You can see the reference there where I talk about that particular kind of method, which I've used before in other work. The video data was logged, and we focused on writing in real time. This particular aspect, as Udi has said, is currently being analyzed and written about, but this paper focuses purely on the interview data. Interviews were transcribed, anonymized in terms of university participant names, identified details as per the usual ethical processes of our university, and of course for educational and social research. We also sent the transcripts, some of them back to the participants so they can check them and add more to them. There was a process of thematic coding from which these themes have been crystallized. The 4 themes in front of you. How is writing a means of becoming international? How knowledge is produced through writing? How writing is publication is learned? And how this relates to expectations during doctoral training. And our participants are, as I say, from various universities across the country.
It's type of university, private and public universities.
Type, yeah. So our research attempts to fill a key gap in the higher education knowledge base about how international shifts across higher education markets are creating new expectations on global South, or what some people call global South academics. So not just Indonesia, but similar shifts are taking place elsewhere. The participants had to have completed the PhD within the last 4 years, or be enrolled in a PhD whilst being a lecturer in a university in Indonesia, and undertaking a PhD in a globally research-intensive university. So let's start with some analysis. In the data, we found that whenever becoming international was discussed, it was discussed alongside writing and indicators for writing. Academic publishing as a social practice is intrinsically entangled with international intentions. You know this, I'm sure you know this. But when Indonesian academics wrote for Indonesian journals, they wrote those articles for international audiences, even though it was for a local journal. And often international academics would be asked to write and to also contribute and be on editorial boards. Some of the Indonesian academics, however, when asked about being international, produced different answers. Some talked about their doctoral experience in another country as qualifying them as an international academic, because they've worked with a supervisor and with doctoral peers in another country. There are tensions around what that means, because when not every participant spoke about that themselves as an international academic, and not everybody used English to achieve an international status. Some academics use Mandarin and were involved in working with Chinese and Taiwanese universities. And others used cultural indicators of internationalization, like working with the wider Muslim world, and not just with the Anglosphere. So what being international means is quite interesting and often connected to a PhD, but not always connected to the PhD. It is often connected to Indonesia's status as a global, as not just a global economy, but a regional economy, working with Southeast Asian countries and their higher education systems close by to home. Achieving an international perspective is not straightforward, and often it is tied to the subject discipline. For example, if you're researching a certain kind of, like Munir says here, doing scientific, and Sayanto says in physics, working with a particular kind of volcano requires bringing in experts from different parts of the world. And so there are certain disciplinary indicators of internationalization. Collaboration.
One thing to highlight about the international is that publishing has been used by most of the participants as a means to become, an international school. And I think this is something that is really interesting, and this could be an indication that there is a shift. There is a new way of seeing writing and publishing, not simply as a fulfillment of obligation that a researcher or a lecturer has to write and publish, but then this publishing has been used as a strategic means or tool for scholars in Indonesia to be more well-known globally, Ibrahim. And that is much expressed by our participants.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Right. I think the next is
many questions and comments from our audience as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right. The next interesting finding is about collaboration and co-authorship. So our participants really value collaboration and co-authorship, especially with much more experienced writers. So in the context of our research, because there are more participants who are doing doctorate degrees at the same time while this project was conducted, they say that collaboration with their supervisors is a very potential way for them to get their writing published. And this is very interesting because they have an idea that when they could write and collaborate with their supervisor, they will find a shortcut to publish their paper. They gain more confidence because they say that their paper is held to be polished by the supervisor. And then when the paper is done and ready for publishing, they gain much better confidence that this paper will be published. And then co-authorship is another bridge for them to be able to publish. I think this is not only for the lecturers that we interviewed, but also, the lecturers that we interviewed who are still doing their doctoral study, but the academics who have already completed their PhD. So they try to maintain this collaboration and co-authorship with their previous supervisors in order to, make sure that their papers is in high quality because of the assistance given by the supervisor. And another issue is that because English is not our language, I know that I'm quite sufficient in saying things in English, but when it comes to an academic English, it's something else. So that there is an expectation by the participants we interview that the academic English that they think very challenging, you know, to be put into their writing will be much helped and at the same time improve through the aid or assistance of the supervisor. So the way this participant value collaboration and co-authorship is also another interesting finding, which probably not we found in you know 10 or even 15 years ago. Now, because the trend is want every academic to publish in high-ranking journals. So then the eye of most of the participants that we interviewed is that making collaboration and co-authorship as a shortcut in order to publish their research paper. So I think that's another interesting issue that we found in the interview.
And of course, there is a distinction between collaborating and co-authoring. Sure. Not every collaborator is a co-author, and not every co-author is a collaborator. But the research showed that one was a path to the other, and that co-authoring was intrinsically connected to mentoring. Some chose only to work with senior writers, senior academics, and not those below them. And those who had trouble networking internationally through their PhD engaged in the practice of co-authoring with their students and used the co-authoring process as a teaching activity to collectively edit articles. So co-authoring and collaborating are producing certain kinds of literacy strategies, literacy activities, which we have not, perhaps didn't exist before. Somebody's annotating the slides I can just see online.
Interesting, yeah.
So that takes us to the role of the doctorate, which is an important part of the research, is looking at what is the role of the doctorate in this whole new set of circumstances. In the current academic labor market in Indonesia, the role of academic mentors emerges as extremely important and closely connected, as Budi says, to the doctoral process. The intellectual support given during supervision was deemed so important by our participants that it was something that would continue beyond the doctoral process itself. Unlike in European universities, where mentoring for the doctorate is related to the transition into university employment, for our participants who are already employed, academic mentoring takes a slightly different character. We found that the expectations of doctoral training are firmly intertwined with academic commitments back home in Indonesia. The PhD offers a very important form of networking, training, and meaningful academic patronage. The question emerges, of course, is whether the doctorate in its usual form, as delivered by universities like ours, 3 or 4 years of research on a topic, production of a thesis, occasional academic development activities, whether this provides an adequate preparation for the changing demands faced by Indonesian academics. Are you getting what you're paying for, as we say in English? In addition to the formal and structured aspect of the doctorates, the academics in our study reported networked and collaborative and informal forms of learning, which was haphazard and individualized during their doctoral degrees. People worked with their supervisors, of course. Not everybody does, but some people did. Many people also worked with their supervisors' colleagues. In fact, this is what's happening now. He was not my PhD student here, but he was somebody else's, and I pinched him in the sense that I thought that, you know, we could work on something together. So he's done the very thing that our participants have talked about. He's engaged in another project in his university with an academic in a British university. People worked also with their doctoral peers and wrote with them. So used the PhD experience as a way to network internationally. So the PhD is not about the PhD entirely. It's about something much more than that. It is about becoming international and co-authoring and collaborating, even informally, with doctoral peers. As you can see by these academics in these quotes, which I hope, I'm not going to read the quotes out. I expect you to read them as we provide a commentary. It would be, you know, futile for me to just read them.
Iber, I think related to this role of the doctorate, Another important finding to highlight is that the academic atmosphere and then the research infrastructure. So the participants also, express their satisfaction actually, because they did their doctorate in the university where they told that the support in terms of, for example, books and then journals and so on are quite even more than sufficient. They feel that this kind of academic atmosphere really helped them to understand better the practice of academic writing, and then the process of writing for publication. Because once they get stuck on, for example, information on how to publish their work when it's done, then they have support from the university, which I think very much important for us probably here who are running the same doctoral programs to think a lot about this research infrastructure and then the academic atmosphere, which we really need to make sure that the academic atmosphere that we have here in our campuses in Indonesia really support our doctoral students to have better access to literature so that they can write better, because they understand how to write better as supported by the existing literature. This is my part. Yeah. Right, barriers and difficulties with writing. Yeah, this is another part of the interview when they complain about the facilities that I have mentioned about the research infrastructure. Example, they say that it's quite hard to to download journals or research articles that they think they really need, which comes from high-ranking international journals. So most of the participants complain about the current infrastructure of academic in most, not probably in Jakarta, in Java Islands, but our colleagues who are teaching in universities in other islands complain about this situation. Okay, and then lack of funding is also another issue. Funding is about motivation. When they write and then they are successfully published the research article in high-ranking international journal, Q1, Q2, for example, and the university provide them incentive, then they will be, much more motivated to write and publish. And the implication, of course, to their career in the academia, because they have more publication, the journey to be a professor is much even closer. Okay, so I think that's the kind of barriers. The other kind of issue emerged from these barriers and difficulties with writing of the participants is English. They always say, yes, we know how to speak in English, we can write in English, but when it comes to an academic English for academic writing, it's hard. So I think that's one of the most interesting findings to me when we talk a lot about the academic English, which they said is a very different English. And once they say that they are proficient in English, it's not always the case that they are also good at academic English, which means that we need to do something in order to help Indonesian academics to write in a very good academic English. Yeah, continue, please, Ibra. Next slide.
How are we for time?
About 5 minutes more.
All right.
Okay. Well, I will whisk through this very quickly then. The social media aspect is not particularly exciting, so I'll do it very quickly. Almost all of the participants reported occasional engagement with social media. Most of it was to find publications that are not yet published or unavailable via their institutional service. Apart from using them as passive users, few participants very few used it for more sustained engagement, simply because they don't have the time to actually do it. Usually, mostly in terms of instrumental terms, such as requesting feedback, locating articles, seeking training and development activities, that sort of thing. When it comes to learning to write as an academic, we found that networking and mentoring were the most important ways of learning through it with each other, with other students, and also with the doctoral process, through the doctoral process. And even reviewing itself, even submitting something for review and getting it reviewed by editors. I mean, that was an incredible learning experience for a lot of the participants. Some people would just throw things in for review and get them back. And so dealing with reviewer comments as a literacy practice and negotiating the corrections was sometimes done as a team with teams of people, something I have not personally seen before. People even used technologies like Grammarly and Quillbot. But what Udi mentioned earlier about language, that was often overcome through literacy brokerage, which was a term that we use to describe people who help you with the language element of research writing. And you know, we've written about that in the article. So yeah, I mean, learning to write is entirely hinged on the doctoral degree, and also through personal experience. There's not really any other way to learn to write as an academic. Not a lot generic training workshops were not really spoken about very positively, and that's something that is not even, a lot of the participants don't even have access to such workshops, especially those outside the island of Java, and varied conceptions of critical thinking, etc. So there's a lot more there. So I'll just conclude, if that's okay. So our research provides an account of the various ways in which academics in Indonesia are negotiating the transformations that they are subject to, how these are disciplinary, institutional, and cross-national boundaries. There are, of course, possible divergences across gender, career stage, discipline subject, and status, financial or otherwise, of the university in question. And these divergences suggest routes for further fine-grained research exploration. And there's also a pressing need to examine the multifaceted role of the doctorate as a suitable apprenticeship for professional life for Indonesian academics. So our research takes place at the intersection of policy and practice, and this creeping hegemony of Anglophone journals and systems of research evaluation. We have found that there is a disparity. In fact, there are several disparities in terms of how academics transition from a doctoral student to a actual fully fledged productive researcher. And these disparities are across regions in the country. There are disparities across private and public sector universities, and they favor symbolic capital possessed by those Indonesian scholars who have access to the best resources, usually within Java. And so we have found that new expectations have created what Deborah Brandt would call a piling up of literacy. There's just more writing activities to be engaging with. You've got to collaborate, so you've got to communicate in order to collaborate. So there's a piling up of writing that begets writing that gives rise to more forms of writing, and what Deborah Brandt would call an extending out of literacy. So not just a piling up, but extending out. So all of a sudden your literacies have to be global as well as local. You know, you've got this double bind, possibly even triple bind of local impact, of local research writing, possibly regional impact and regional research writing as a Southeast Asian academic. So, you know, and you've got this global impact and global research writing. So one would say a double or possibly even a triple bind in relation to that. And there are transitions which can be discoursal, related to language issues, but also structural, related to what facilities that people have in their universities or don't have, and the development of mediators and mentors and mentoring as a way of instilling academic values rather than using index, Scopus index or metrics as a sole proxy for quality. Develop how you develop academic writers in Indonesia. This may have to be rethought. It may have to be thought through differently. Being productive means amalgamating new literacy practices with conflicting demands on time, ability, allegiance, as well as all the different forms of impact. Is that a cough to tell me to hurry up?
I guess so.
Sorry.
by the way, one last thing. We acknowledge that in order to attain a better picture of specific disciplinary pressures on writing, deeper research needs to be done within the disciplines. But our aim was to capture how people are responding generally to these policies. So, so that's what we sought to do, and we hope we have achieved that. We believe that there's a periphery within a periphery, because Indonesia is classed as and like many global South countries, classed as a peripheral country in terms of knowledge production and academic work. But I don't know if that's a fair characterization. But there's definitely a periphery within Indonesia. There are different peripheries within Indonesia, and so that's it really. Yeah. Anything to finish off, Rudy? Because I think I'm done.
Enough. Time is up. Yeah. Thank you.
So I'll open you for questions.
Okay, thanks very much. A really, really thought-provoking presentation, which made me think about all sorts of things that I'm observing and have experienced in other universities in Indonesia over the decades. There have been a lot of contributions to the chat box, but they're nearly all people introducing themselves. There's one question I noticed from Ibu Dia from UNS. Would you like to ask your question, Ibu Dia? Hello, Ibu Dia, are you there? See if I can find it.
Microphone.
Oh yeah, please go on.
Okay. Actually, I have written down everything on the chat box, and you are able to read it from the chat box rather than repeating again my question.
Right. I think it would be easier if you tell us what the question is.
Okay. Right. Okay. I think I would like to something that I learned from my PhD students, especially. They have three very serious problems domestically, internally, in terms of producing writing for international publication. First is finding research gap. So they have a serious problem of how to trace issues, informations from research-based articles by synthesizing, and then they can establish the research gap. That is problem. And the second thing is, it seems that they have also challenges in terms of finding novelties. Finding novelties, because having novelty is one of the most important criteria for an international publication, especially when it comes to publication with a highly reputed journal. I think those three issues need to be addressed first before we are talking about productivity. Thank you.
Thank you. Ibra?
So when it comes to novelty, look, there are different ways to look at this, okay? Novelty isn't everything, and the obsession with novelty is unhealthy in academia, and a lot of young academics are being pushed into trying to find something new, and it's almost like a novel fetishization of newness. You've got to find something new, you've got to find something different, got to find a gap. And I don't think it's done very well a lot of the time, if I'm completely honest. I don't think it's that necessary as people say it is, as people seem to think it is. But usually, if a person is engendering in themselves a researcher mindset, then they should find research problems almost everywhere. There are research problems everywhere. There's a research problem in that very question of yours, Budia. Right, so it's about engendering a researcher mindset, and that's how you develop research problems. That's how you are able to understand things as research possible or potential research problems. But I don't like, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't like academia's obsession with newness and novelty. I don't think it's good. it's going. You see all sorts of things now which may not be very rigorous in terms of research and in terms of research quality, but they claim to be finding out something new. A lot of academia is just trying to understand something that currently exists. I mean, that's really what being a researcher is about. But in terms of synthesizing information, I mean, this is about having access to the information, and also the skills of synthesizing. So writing is not an isolated skill. It's related to reading, and in fact related to speaking, and related to listening. Academic writing is related to academic speaking and academic reading. So if people are having trouble bringing ideas together, maybe they need, to practice academic reading, and note-taking and that sort of thing. I don't know if Udi has anything else to add on that, which is connected to the Indonesian context.
I think he brought, Prof there is correct by saying that speaking about productivity could be something that is still, much broader issue. We can start from a very simple things that the fact is most of academics, say doctoral students, encounter problems with gap. So when we talk about research gap, we talk actually about the most difficult problem that students face. And then the second one about the novelties, this is another issue. I encountered almost similar situation when I started my doctoral degree program. But the insight from this study is, I think it's very good, which is about, for example, a more comprehensive mentoring and then co-authorship, where more experienced writers should be a mentor, should allow young researchers, young academics to better understand the writing of research article, starting, for example, discussing about how is research article in a specific discipline is written. There is a norm, there is convention, and understanding these two are essential for, for new researchers who start writing research paper and then learning to publish in journals. So what we emphasize is that the benefit of our research is very clear, that understanding the problems, including this gap and novelty that is also shared by our participants, is that mentoring or collaborations with much more experienced writers. So we can start from this idea that yes, new researchers or early career academics would face this kind of barriers. But then we need to think of how to assist them. That is why a more comprehensive mentoring, as we suggest throughout or after conducting this study, is very much important to be considered.
Okay, thanks.
Agree, Pak Udi, because whenever we are talking about publishing in Scopus, especially quartile 1 and quartile 2, the three that I have mentioned earlier, becomes the most important requirements, and that this also go along with the policy of the governments, unfortunately, that we believe very much in Scopus, even though lately we are trying to do some migration to Sinta, but this is still a long process. Thank you very much for Ibrar and Udi.
Thank you, Ibu. We can do more genre analysis studies, I think, in order to help.
There's I can see that Professor Arita has a long comment. Ibu Arita, would you like to tell us what you've written there? Ibu Arita?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Hayul. Thank you very much, Dr. Bhatt and Dr. Saman Budi, for the very insightful presentation. When I encountered problems in academic writing, especially for writing my article in the international journal, usually I was only given advice on the essential components I should include in my writing, such as that I should clearly state the contribution of this research and what research gap that I should address in my article. International journal reviewers only focus on the content, no specific guidance on how I may improve my academic expressive ability. Sometimes it is believed that if someone has a high proficiency in English, that is also implies having good academic writing skills. Although academic writing proficiency is somewhat related to general language proficiency, improvements in the latter do not necessarily lead to the improvement in the former. What is your opinion about the best strategies to improve our academic writing proficiency? Thank you.
Shall I answer this, or do you?
I think you first.
All right. Thank you for this question. It's very interesting, and it's a very important question. I have a number of different responses to it. First part of it is the journals don't support with the academic writing. So some do. In fact, in our journal, Teaching in Higher Education, we have now a new system called an enhanced level of review. I've forgotten what it's called now, but it's not just a normal review; it's a higher level of a review. So we're actually allocating time for that, and other journals have slightly different ways of dealing with that. Some of my colleagues who are some of the most erudite in academic writing are not, their communicative abilities in other areas are not very high. It's not very high, and so you are quite right there. That general language proficiency is not necessarily connected to academic writing proficiency, the best strategies to improve academic writing proficiency, well, my own personal opinion and practice over so many years is that these skills are related to each other: reading, writing, speaking, listening. So I tell my PhD students to present on their research and to talk about their research and to formulate their thoughts. The reason is because, and to rehearse those formulations, writing is not the end product of your thinking. It is the way to think. Okay, you develop your thought processes through writing. So keep writing. I handwrite most of my work, by the way. I do keep notes sometimes digitally, but most things I handwrite because I think there's a neurological connection between deep thinking and handwriting. That's my personal sort of anecdotal, based on anecdotal evidence, my personal view. I also think that keeping a lot of notebooks on your reading activities and engaging in many seminars where you are talking about those reading activities, that will develop the writing skills. So you might be thinking, I should tell you to go to an academic writing workshop. Let me tell you, I never went to one in my entire life. Okay, but I went to loads of reading group meetings and loads of seminars, and I take loads of notes on everything that I've read, and I talk about those things that I've read, and I believe that has developed my academic writing skills. Because not every so-called native speaker is a very good academic writer. I used to work at a university in the UK where there were hardly any international students, yet there was a special measure in place to help local working class, mostly white, but also other ethnic groups, British youngsters in university, to help them with their academic writing, though they were quote-unquote native speakers. So this is not an issue of overall competency. It is an issue of a particular kind of discourse and it's often related to social conventions and social practice and cultural norms that a person has to develop in their life in order to improve. That's just my personal view.
Okay.
If I
go on.
Yeah, I still remember one of the participants said a quite tricky strategy in order to improve his research article writing skill. He sent one paper to several journals, which is not allowed actually. And then he always sends to a high ranking journals with an expectation that he would get feedback from the editors or from the reviewers when it goes to the review stage. And then he learned the feedback provided by the reviewers or by even the editors. So this way, he said, it's very helpful in improving his ability to write research articles, because the feedback provided by the reviewers from high-ranking journals is never rubbish, according to him. So he learns a lot from that. This tricky way or strategy could be applied, I trust. And second one, I still remember in a training on discourse analysis when I did my doctorate, we were asked by the instructor or the mentor at the time to really understand section per section of research article. So we try to identify, for example, the kinds of linguistic features in every section. We also learn how this section is organized. And then when it is about background, where the research gap is mostly constructed, we were also encouraged to understand how the gap is constructed. So this way of doing text analysis is also very helpful. We are not only learning, the academic English, but how this research article is constructed and the kind of, academic vocabularies that are very typical and used in our own discipline. So I think these two ways could be, tried. Which one is more effective? It's really, relative. It really depends on which one we prefer. But I think learning from these two experiences, I would really encourage everyone to also think about, sending our draft to high-ranking journals, not expect that we directly accept and publish, but we expect for feedback given by reviewers from high-ranking international journals. So we can learn a lot, I believe, yeah.
Thank you very much.
I don't know if you agree or disagree, but that's my experience of learning from my friends who were the participants in this research project.
That's a very interesting observation.
Yeah, Udi, I don't think that's always a good thing to do, but I understand why people do it. Because reviews are very capricious. They are the person's individual opinion. They don't always give you the formative feedback that you need. In fact, sometimes they're not very good. I'm going to be completely honest with you. Okay, and increasingly, I'm not impressed with them. And so I don't think that's a good strategy anymore.
I think that's because you are an expert writer already, not for us.
But I do believe in mentoring, and this goes back to the previous question. I think Indonesian universities need to do two things. I think you need to invest in mentoring. My university invests in mentoring. I have a mentor, and that person is paid by my school to help me write articles and write ground proposals. If that's, and I think that the universities need to do that, to allocate mentors who can inculcate in the Indonesian academics those things that we've just talked about over the last 10 minutes or so. That would be better than randomly throwing it out to multiple journals looking for reviews. It would, I think that kind of investment is really important. Sorry,
I think we have to stop now. I can see there are still a few more.
Yeah,
There's still a few more questions, but I think we've run out of time. Is it possible for you to stop sharing your slides?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have stopped that. Is it stopped?
Yeah, okay, thanks. So really very thought-provoking presentation. One thing that I thought about while listening to what you were saying was, from my own observations, there seem to be at least 4 different ways in which academics here can publish. One is in reputable international journals. One is in not reputable international journals, which can charge a lot of money. One is in local journals, which may not be widely read. And increasingly in conference proceedings, which claim to be approved by Scopus. So I can see that there's a lot of concern when people sign up for conferences. One of the attractions is a promise that their paper will appear in Scopus approved proceedings. Anyway, unfortunately, we don't have time to take this any further. Really, really interesting. And I could see that there were more than 300 people here, which is a record for our program. So thanks very much to both of you. Just to bring the session to an end, I'd like to say a little bit about our next meeting, which will be on the 15th of September. The speaker will be Julia Suryakusuma, who is well known in Indonesia as a writer and journalist. And she's talking about, a topic of her presentation is the birth, death, and rebirth of the Indonesian women's movement. So this fits into the category of society in our program. Development. Thanks very much to everyone for participating, and thanks very much to our two speakers for a really very stimulating presentation. Thanks a lot.
Recording stopped.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Hywel, for moderating this session. And once again, thank you for Dr. Butt and Dr. Samanhudi for being our keynote speakers, and all participants who have actively involved in our international program. For your information, this is monthly international Zoominar program, and every month we invite distinguished keynote speakers to share their perspective on topics we care about. You are welcome to join us every month. Please keep yourself updated by checking our website for further information regarding the monthly international Zoominar program. It's on https://pps@unj.ac.id. Thank you very much for your kind attention. See you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.